What happens when one of modern medicine's most important anesthetics starts to catalyze or create mystical experiences almost indistinguishable from ancient spiritual revelation, or mystical experiences indistinguishable from those which have been so well documented to be caused by classic psychedelics such as psilocybin or LSD? This episode will explore whether ketamine is just another medical drug or a catalyst for spiritual transformation. As a psychedelic attorney over the last 6 years, I've noticed more and more people turning to ketamine in various contexts, whether solo or in small groups, but ultimately with the same objective to achieve some form of spiritual growth and development. However, today while we are exploring ketamine spiritual experiences, we're going to see what value that could actually bring to the medical community and whether physicians here in America at least can be trained to better help facilitate spiritual growth and development alongside helping people with their mental and physical health. In doing this, today we will be looking at a journal article published by Southern Methodist University entitled Ketamine's Role in Spirituality: How One Synthetic Drug Catalyzes a Natural Experience. Okay, and as we will see, this specific paper, one, investigates the extent to which ketamine-induced primary religious mystical experiences can help bring awareness to the compatibility of spirituality and physical health. And two, it also compares the mechanisms of ketamine and psilocybin as well as their value to the medical community. Finally, I'm going to end on doing a little bit of pondering the larger, and I get this all the time, theological question about whether a synthetic or man-made substance can be fairly, both in a legal and practical manner, be considered a religious sacrament, something that's sacred because it doesn't come from the earth. As we'll see, a lot of people differ on that question, and so we'll do a little bit of exploring of that at the very end here. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm psychedelic attorney Greg Lake. This is my homeboy, Buddy Bear, helping me hold down the set. This is the EntheoSK YouTube channel and podcast. We're very blessed and honored that you joined us today. If you have the bandwidth, please give us a like, comment, subscribe. Any support would be very much appreciated. Let's hop right into the paper. Okay, so now we're here. And again, as we can see right here on the screen, the title of this paper from SMU is from January 2021, entitled Ketamine's Role in Spirituality: How One Synthetic Drug Catalyzes a Natural Experience. This is from Samaya Woods. And just real quick, if we go down, it indicates, and by Dr. Menard, I take that back, G. William Barnard, who is actually a professor of religious studies at SMU's Department of Religious Studies. So just wanted to point that out before we started. But again, ketamine's role in spirituality: how one synthetic drug catalyzes a natural experience. So when we go through the background here, kind of the first thing, and let me just square this away real quick, is that this paper first kind of goes through, as we'll see, and discusses, the fact that modern medicine, the way it's practiced and ultimately taught, does not focus much, if at all, on spiritual health. Okay, so as we'll see, the first of this paper really kind of goes through that and talks about why that is. But let's go. So it actually starts off with defining spiritual. It says, is defined as something, and in the terms of, let me just back up for just 1 second. To better understand how ketamine-induced experiences are potentially spiritual in nature, we first have to clarify the term spiritual. Here they say, defined as something that is more than our typical waking reality. It is, at its most expansive, the experience of becoming one with all that exists, going beyond the boundaries of time and space. So in the context of ketamine-induced experiences, I'll accept that for now. Obviously, I could say term spiritual has much more expansive definition, but for our purposes here on this paper today, fine. But here it goes. It says, spiritual experience present an interesting challenge to modern medicine. American medicine has become increasingly scientific, and the focus is on physical and psychological care. It says it hasn't always been like that, and traces the transition to this more material scientific-based medicine to this 1910 Flexner report. It doesn't discuss it in detail, other than to say that it was an important foundation to put American medical education firmly in the footing of physical science. It does say that spirituality did have a prominent role in medicine prior to the technological advances of the 20th century. Yeah, it gives a shout out and says, thank you, modern medical science, because it has saved a lot of lives, right? It has absolutely saved a lot of lives. But, in adopting this empirical model of medicine, it has been at the expense of really, medicine being a more holistic field that really takes into account both secular and metaphysical ideologies in its practice. Okay. And as we'll see, this paper really, and again, from the Department of Religious Studies, really starts to argue, that, hey, spiritual health, should probably be more integrated in modern medicine into a more holistic type of practice. Okay. But again, it kind of just lays that out. And again, that'll be kind of an undercurrent and argument going through this entire paper. But they go on to say that at the beginning of the 21st century, right, researchers began to rediscover the importance of spirituality and its potential on physical and mental health. It states, modern medicine has, in the 21st century, has identified and has started acknowledging the importance of spirituality and has been exploring, right, with psychedelic research, these other modalities have been researched about how to invoke spiritual, mystical, religious types experiences, okay? Then it kind of goes into, again, now we start getting into the ketamine spiritual experiences, but it immediately starts out, and this will be a theme going through the paper, that ketamine or it says here anesthetics, right, and psilocybin share a lot of significant similarities, as we'll see, both in their physical method of action in the brain and the body, but also in the type of spiritual religious experiences that they effectuate. So first off, we kind of get into the real scientific stuff. The paper talks about the physical and subjective ways that ketamine and psilocybin affect the brain. Here it says, by comparing psychedelic and anesthetic pathways that can alter or even heighten consciousness, we may be able to identify key brain areas and networks that mediate conscious experience. Neuroimaging has shown that psilocybin decreases cerebral blood flow and has uncovered patterns of functional disconnections like many anesthetics, talking about psilocybin functions similar, at least in some ways, as anesthetics in the brain. It says psilocybin significantly decreases blood flow to the posterior. I'm not even going to get into those, but there's a few brain regions here, and I'll leave a link to this paper in the description for everybody. It goes on to say further, psilocybin reduces functional connectivity between the anterior and posterior regions of the cortex, similar to brain patterns found during anesthesia. Okay, and again, ketamine is an anesthetic. For our purpose here, it says psilocybin brain pathways compare to those of ketamine by similar decreased connectivity in the amygdala and the anterior cingulate cortex, which is ACC for short, moving forward in this paper. But okay, so here's an important part I feel was interesting, at least. It is important to know that similarities based on low dose administrations of ketamine. It says in anesthetic doses, which would be much higher doses of ketamine, there are significant reductions of thalamus activity, like what is found in psilocybin. The regulation of our waking consciousness and the connectivity between our emotions, intelligence, concentration, and self-awareness, as well as our spatial and visual perception, are altered similarly by psilocybin and general anesthesia. So again, it's just kind of laying out the similarities in activity on the brain between psilocybin and ketamine, what that looks in terms of neuroimaging. Again, just pointing out the similarities that we can physically see in the brain in between these two different substances, entering the body. Here it talks about a paper with a 5-point biological model for the relationship between religious and spiritual experiences in the brain. And this is pretty interesting right here, right? So this is just talking about, neuroimaging showing when people are having these spiritual religious experiences. I'm assuming this is irrespective of whether it's, drug induced or induced through other manners. But it goes through the different areas of the brain. We'll just generally touch on this. But the temporal brain areas, these are for memory retrieval, emotional coloring of experience, biological motion perception, face perception. religious and spiritual beliefs, visions, hallucinations, deja vu experiences. So this is just saying like what aspects of this area being affected contribute to religious spiritual beliefs. Okay, next, multisensory integration. This function is bodily self-consciousness, multisensory integration. For religious spiritual beliefs, it says mystical experiences, self-transcendence, out-of-body experiences, feelings of a presence. Okay. The default mode network, that's a very popular one, right? I think this one has to do with a lot to do with, what do we call ego dissolution, right? I think the default mode network is where our ego exists and shutting it down, right? And I talked about that with the 5-MeO DMT video. But here it says function, self-referential processing, mind wandering. Religious and spiritual beliefs, yes. Mystical experiences, ego dissolution, reflective religious beliefs, okay? Theory of mind network. Let's go here. And as y'all notice, I'm not reading the specific brain regions. It's a little bit outside the scope of what we're doing here. But again, I'll drop a link to this paper if y'all want to take a look. But function, social cognition, communication, intentionality, perception. Religious spiritual beliefs, prayer, belief in personal God, attribution of agency. Okay, last, error monitoring mechanisms, function, prediction error monitoring, belief maintenance, and updating. Religious spiritual beliefs, openness to religious authority and rituals. Okay, so again, those are just generally the areas of the brain that are seen to be affected through neuroimaging whenever people are reporting having spiritual, religious, mystical type experiences. Okay, paper goes on to say both psilocybin and ketamine can cause decreased amygdala connectivity. This promotes an emotional, and I know this is right about ketamine, but it promotes an emotional disconnection between what is felt during the typical waking reality and what is felt under the influence of the psychedelic or anesthetic in the case of ketamine. This amygdala, so the amygdala helps regulate religious and spiritual visions and hallucinations, as you just saw, and is associated with positive emotions and rewarding stimuli. Goes on, when considering both the psychedelic cognitive effects psilocybin and the supposed spiritual nature of ketamine, healthy individuals may encounter or relatively safe visions or hallucinations that encourage sanguine, I think I'm saying that right, feelings in order to, one, escape external stresses, or two, find more effective ways to deal with those external stress factors, okay? Decreased amygdala connectivity induced by both drugs, talking about psilocybin and ketamine, is a result of the individual shifting their attention from the normal conscious world of experience and entering the subconscious in order to explore emotions in a different way than they would normally be able to do, okay? Most importantly, feelings produced from the amygdala during both psilocybin and ketamine trips are highly likely to affect the individual in their psychedelic exploration. So again, it's kind of really attributing this amygdala action to a lot of the similarities and ability of psilocybin and ketamine to, have positive, beneficial spiritual religious experiences. Okay, keeps going. He goes, in terms of spiritual beliefs, and again, I told you earlier, the anterior cingulate cortex (ACC) promotes openness. Again, just moving to a different area of the brain, promotes openness to religious authority and rituals. As this researcher reported, both ketamine and psilocybin influence the brain by decreasing connectivity in this area. Okay. And he goes on to say, if these connections are altered, talking about with the ACC, it allows more abstract approaches to dealing with such emotions, talking about difficult emotions. Okay. Therefore, under spiritual influences, such as those that are at times provided by ketamine, authoritative religious figures or beliefs. We're not a huge fan of authoritative religious figures here per se, not speaking down about it, but just want to throw that out there. Can be a determining factor in how the individual reacts to stresses after their psychedelic experience. Okay. Goes on to say these similarities are talking about between psilocybin and ketamine are supported in the post-psychedelic reflections of several healthy individuals. So let's just read these real quick. So again, these are post, intense or, ketamine-induced spiritual experience. Okay, these are, and I think this might be the low dose. Let me look. I think this might be low dose ketamine, but I think it makes that more clear here in just a second. But it says, 1/6 to 1/10 of the dose used for general anesthesia, ketamine can create psychedelic experience. So again, sub-anesthetic doses can create psychedelic experiences with disconnection from surroundings, perceptions of floating, becoming disembodied as a mind or soul, right? And even dying and going to a different world. These are people reporting this even on sub-anesthetic doses of ketamine. But also loss of reality contact appears more loss of reality contact appears more pronounced than with other psychedelics. Okay, so like you're being tethered to this manifest reality is actually less so with ketamine than with psilocybin and other classic psychedelics, presumably. But he goes on to say the sub-anesthetic doses of ketamine can produce the shifts in conscious thought that encourage spiritual experiences. Okay. Quote unquote, ketamine produced dose-related psychedelic effects supporting that different doses of ketamine can produce significantly psychedelic and thus spiritual experiences. So it's kind of, here they've kind of completely equated psychedelic with spiritual experience. Now, real quick, I'll say that we do know that, a very high number of people who consume psychedelics at a sufficient dose, talking about psilocybin in particular, in the proper setting, do report primary religious mystical experiences. So, that's not a completely unfair or unwarranted equation there, in my opinion. But he goes on. The ketamine-induced non-ordinary experiences may include emotionally intense visions, deceased relatives, angel spirits, right? Encounters with archetypal beings like Christ, Buddha, Krishna, feelings of cosmic unity with the universe and God. Again, these, unitive consciousness, this, ultimate, what's another word for it in the psilocybin literature? I'll think about it and let y'all know. But sense of sacredness and feelings of interconnectedness with all people and nature. Okay, so those are what people have reported non-ordinary experiences induced by ketamine. It goes on. The above components ketamine-induced experience directly align with ketamine's involvement in the amygdala and the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex. Okay. At high doses, ketamine experience, so this is high dose. That was low dose ketamine we just discussed. What about high dose? Can induce an ego-dissolving transcendental experience for the patient, including feelings of interconnectedness with all people or sense of experiencing collective consciousness, right? Unitive consciousness, feelings of becoming God, frequently experiences as an ocean of brilliant white light. That would be similar, in my opinion, to the 5-MeO-DMT experience. And then profound sense of sacredness of the experience, okay? It goes on to say these ego-dissolving transcendental experiences can generate some resolution of the patient's addictive illnesses, psychological problems, and personality disorders, including spontaneous healing from chronic psychosomatic illnesses. Okay, it's important to note that transcendental experiences can occur with sub-anesthetic and high doses of ketamine. Like I just said, these two different doses are producing very similar spiritual type experiences. I would assume that really the difference there being the intensity of those. Okay, but don't quote me on that. Methodology, just real quick, this is actually just a literature review. It analyzes previous studies on the spiritual aspects of ketamine and how these ketamine experiences can help establish a more holistic healthcare system, which it's going to get into here in just a minute. This project also compares the spiritual experiences between ketamine and psilocybin, a classic psychedelic that has also been reported to provide spiritual effects, as we've discussed here. Lastly, in this section, this comparison will be used to question whether ketamine-induced experiences should be deemed valuable as well as the psilocybin ones, and presumably therefore warranting further research. But finally, the comparison of ketamine and psilocybin, as well as testimonies of ketamine users, will be used to argue the necessity of reconciling spiritual and physical health. Okay. Now let's talk about results. All right. Yeah, the favorite part, the results. It says the spiritual testimonies of recreational ketamine users were compelling. Quote unquote, I rose into the light and found myself having an unspoken interchange with the light, which I believe to be God, about matters which seemed to be of central importance to my life and who I was. I didn't believe in God. Okay, so this was an atheist going in. I didn't believe in God, which made the ketamine experience even more startling. That experience seriously shook the basis of my belief. Okay. Another one, quote unquote, ketamine was very upsetting, and it did not shake my atheism. Okay, so someone who wasn't really turned away from atheism per se, very much so. Oh, it did shake my atheism. I apologize. I apologize. It did shake my atheism, very much so. I'm just really pleased that I found it when I did, because I think it was a godsend, actually. I regard ketamine as a sort of spiritual enhancer. So, again, maybe this person considers it to be sacred, sacrament, something that they use for spiritual growth and development. Certainly, the description of these two experiences, if someone who described that then told me they considered ketamine sacred, well, I'd certainly believe them. Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, we're going to get to the larger theological question at the end of this video. It goes on, those who have experience with ketamine insist that the events they encounter are real. Like I said in the DMT, 5-MeO-DMT videos, people report that these things are very real to them, like more real than reality. So again, this is analogous to ketamine, apparently. It says these firsthand accounts do support the hypothesis that ketamine experiences are spiritually valuable. Goes on down here. The physical mechanisms that are affected by ketamine and anesthetic practices directly affect the state of the conscious mind by increasing subconscious activity. With heightened subconscious awareness, the capacity to welcome and understand spiritual concepts is increased, and the result of doing so can affect how the patient chooses to physically manage their recovery process. So again, this paper is really putting this spiritual use of ketamine in the context of mental and mostly physical healing and health, how doctors can integrate it into that larger process, okay? Now, it does say, and let me just say this while we're here, this video is not here to endorse or promote or encourage the use of ketamine or any other substance, licit or illicit, okay? And this is a great time to take a second and look at the fact that there are negative side effects to ketamine, and I don't take this to be an exhaustive list of those, okay? But let's point it out. And it calls here, I've never heard this, K-pains. It says, yeah, the other side effects of ketamine can be it's called K-pains, and can be severe stomach pains that can hospitalize the user. Okay, it goes on to say other physiological responses due to ketamine-induced non-ordinary experiences can include chest pain and rapid heartbeat, increased blood pressure. I have heard about that one, and increased susceptibility to infection. I didn't know that. Physicians, specifically anesthesiologists, should consider these experiences important to their patient's health, in that neurotic experiences often have physiological effects, okay? Now, it goes on. Anesthesiologists tend to associate the psychedelic effects of ketamine with emergence from anesthesia after use of ketamine as an induction agent, which is often referred to as emergence reaction. So basically what they're getting at there is that a lot of anesthesiologists, when people are reporting otherwise thing that might indicate, oh, they're having a spiritual religious experience, they're, from what it says, really attributing it to this emergence effect. It goes on, though. Roughly 55% of those administered ketamine will experience an emergence reaction that mimics schizophrenia and increases that patient's risk of injury, okay? It goes on, the misattribution of these spiritual experiences as emergence, like I say, it's indicating that, well, a lot of this emergent stuff, Mr. Anesthesiologist, could be spiritual religious experience occurring, okay? But it says that, the misattribution of these spiritual experiences as emergence phenomena accredited to mental illness, and the physician's subconscious treatment of post-ketamine reactions as such can arguably create unintended roadblock to the patient's treatment. So it's basically saying, hey, anesthesiologists, y'all are mischaracterizing this, and this might even be a roadblock to this patient's further, successful physical mental treatment, okay? He goes on, ketamine-induced non-ordinary experiences can encourage, stable recovery from illnesses and injury by promoting patients' psychospiritual growth. So I guess really in put this in context, it's like if someone's coming out of being, put under with ketamine during a surgery, and maybe they're having a spiritual religious experience coming out through this emergence, that could actually be used and identified and worked with to increase the patient's ability to overcome or heal from whatever physical ailment or surgery that they're coming out of. Again, just an example of context, okay? Minimizing the effects spirituality has on physical recovery can risk the progress of a patient's return to health. Again, they're stating, and I think there is science to show this, that spirituality and this holistic approach to health can be very beneficial to physical healing. And so, minimizing the spiritual religious effects of this, in this emergence phenomenon could be detrimental and risk progress or otherwise progress that a patient could have in their physical health. Here they talk about Dr. Matthew Johnson. I'm not going to read specifically from here, but we've discussed it, I think, on this channel. If not, we definitely will. But Dr. Matthew Johnson and them at Johns Hopkins have done studies related to cancer patients and other people facing physical and mental distress, end of life type stuff, and shown that it has been very, very beneficial in helping those people from a physical and mental standpoint in confronting those issues. But it then goes on to talk about, psilocybin and LSD, DMT are serotonergic, classic psychedelics. Those experiences can include timeless, and these are like spiritual mystical effects, timelessness, ineffability, contact and unification with an authoritative presence, experience of a white light, certainty that consciousness continues after physical death, firsthand knowledge of the facts of creation, existence, and consciousness. Okay. And then by juxtaposition, prominent things of ketamine-induced non-ordinary experiences include feelings of becoming God, sense of sacredness, feelings of cosmic unity with the universe and God. Again, we see a lot of parallels here. Encounters with archetypal beings and emotionally intense visions. Okay. It goes on. Similarities between the synthetic drug ketamine and the plant-produced psilocybin include euphoria, peacefulness, spiritual awakening, and quickly changing emotions. Okay. Most apparent similarities are depersonalization. This is talking about, never mind. Most apparent similarities are depersonalization and distorted thinking and or rationales. This research also indicates that ketamine-induced experiences do not produce lasting effects as consistently as psilocybin-induced experiences. In terms of dose, says researchers found that high-dose psilocybin produced acute and persisting effects after 6 months. Participants in that study that found that experienced lasting feelings of interpersonal closeness, death transcendence, daily spiritual experience, and religious faith and coping. It keeps on. The similarity in therapeutic and non-therapeutic psilocybin doses and lack thereof for ketamine, meaning that it hasn't been researched in that context, what dose of ketamine is best for, spiritual mental health. But it goes on, and lack thereof for ketamine can explain why ketamine-induced experiences have not been understood to be as psychologically valuable. It just hasn't really been as acutely researched as psilocybin has, more or less. The lack of research regarding dose-related ketamine-induced experiences in various settings, in addition to positive therapeutic results attributed to psilocybin due to its capacity to produce these mystical experiences, helps establish psilocybin's effectiveness, but does not signify ketamine's relevance in a biospiritual context. Again, just comparing the fact that these two have not been studied to the same degree, with psilocybin in this regard being studied much more than ketamine. It says, regarding the need for spiritual concern in medicine, this researcher examined public polls and surveys that showed the majority of patients want their physicians to inquire about their spiritual concerns in health. Again, the paper is now kind of transitioning into, doctors being more open and actually helping people with their spiritual experiences, spiritual health. Okay. However, studies also indicated that many physicians were uncomfortable discussing spiritual issues. This other doctor proposed that spiritual and religious practices have benefited those with physical conditions such as kidney disease, cancer, cardiovascular disease, HIV, and diabetes. Religion and spirituality may also support psychological coping mechanisms addressing the physical discomfort that accompanies illness and injury. Okay. So just talking about effective communication practices between patient and physicians. Obviously for a doctor to be more attuned and helping with spiritual issues and needs, it would require physicians to be more present as a person rather than as a physician. It is important to note the patient's health and the overall patient-physician relationship for the physician to become more attentive to all possible causes of patient suffering. So talking about diagnosing too, accounting for spiritual health in that paradigm as well. I'm not going to say any more there. I think y'all get the idea. Now we're going to transition into the discussion. Again, we're getting towards the end of the paper, but the discussion, this paper aims to provide a context to examine the extent that ketamine-induced non-ordinary experiences can help bring awareness to compatibility of spiritual and physical health. Comparisons were made to the anesthetic ketamine and a serotonergic hallucinogen psilocybin. In addition, the validity of these ketamine-induced spiritual experiences was examined. Seems to be pretty substantial, and I think in a lot of ways verified that ketamine absolutely can produce spiritual, mystical, religious experiences. Okay. It is crucial that spiritual health, as distinct from spirituality, be better defined in future research with ketamine. Physical, mental, and social perspectives all make up the human experience. However, the aspects of human existence that cannot be rationalized within these contexts makes up individual spiritual health. Spiritual health is an actualization of the differing capacities of human existence. It is how well the individual functions in a shared waking reality with others based on their individual knowledge of what they perceive this shared reality to exceed this shared reality. Spiritual health at its essence is the balance between the physical and emotional aspects of existence. Spiritual health does not require constant internalization of positive feelings or belief in a higher power. Instead, it requires individual discernment of all possible forms of existence. The idea of being spiritually unhealthy, therefore, is the result of dissonance between the individual's understanding of transcendent ideas and their everyday waking reality. Okay. Ketamine can be utilized to promote the reconciliation of spiritual and physical health by one, encouraging the patient to challenge traditional social constructs, those mind programs and belief patterns, at the cost of discovering personal revelations. Two, inducing psychological stressors that can have physical effects. And three, allowing for more open patient-physician conversations. As this other researcher described, the ego-dissolving transcendental experiences of ketamine sometimes generate some resolution of the patient's addictive illnesses. We already went over this. Let's keep going down. And again, this is just stuff on the relationship between doctor-patient and promoting, spiritual as well as physical and mental health. Let's see. These types of conversations will require an intimate relationship between the patient and physician in order to discuss the aftermath of ketamine-induced non-ordinary experiences. So it's talking about conversation between doctor and patient post ketamine-induced spiritual religious experiences. And the willingness of the physician to consider those experiences in the treatment plan. So again, integrating these ketamine experiences to the overall treatment plan of the other physical, mental malady that's being addressed. Ketamine is of special interest in integrating spirituality in modern medicine because of its role in pain management. So basically saying that more doctors, come across patients, who've had a ketamine experience because of surgery and these things. And so that's why this paper is urging that it's a little bit more important in that context, because more and a wider diverse range of doctors will have contact with people who've had ketamine-induced experiences. Okay. It talks about pain perception and how ketamine can help reduce, people's perception of pain, therefore increasing spirituality within that context, because, experiencing pain can affect someone's ability to be spiritual and explore spiritual transformation or experience spiritual transformation. The psychedelic effects associated with ketamine encourage a detachment from these thought processes associated with pain, bringing forth a sense of intense and often overwhelming spiritual vulnerability for the patient. Therefore, an individual's perception of pain may be significantly altered by ketamine. That is to say, these spiritual experiences are ordinarily invisible to us and are accessible using our normal states of consciousness. Okay. In the conclusion, it says this paper does not encourage, neither does this video, the recreational use of ketamine, nor does it propose ketamine should be utilized as a therapeutic substance. Even though it has been and is being utilized in that regard, just so everybody knows. However, this paper aims to raise questions regarding training improvement for medical students. I know that's a long way around the alleged end goal here, but yeah, I guess ultimately because so many doctors will encounter people who've had spiritual religious experiences with ketamine, it's encouraging that we actually go back and train all doctors on dealing with, psychedelic or ketamine anesthetic induced primary religious mystical spiritual experiences, and just have a real quick theological conversation about, this synthetic substances as religious sacrament. This theological questions like, can some synthetic substance like LSD, ketamine, MDMA, and a whole other host, right? I mean, there's a long list of synthetic derived made classic psychedelics, right? And other types of psychedelics too, but like, can those be a religious sacrament? So again, this is all just a matter of really, I would say, personal theology. Some people don't consider things that don't come from the earth to be sacred or of God. Some people consider man to be of earth, of God, and therefore something made by man is also, sacred in that sense and can be used as a sacrament. And then ultimately there's some people kind of in the middle ground, or I say middle ground, somewhere in a third category that really believe that, yes, a synthetic substance can be sacred, but it really matters the intention of the alchemist, right? Or the person who's producing that sacrament. What is their energy and intention in it? Are they spiritual and meaning to put good energy and vibes in that, this substance is going to effectuate really deep, meaningful, primary religious, mystical experiences and healing? So again, those are kind of the three theological camps there. From a legal standpoint, I'll just say this. When we talk about psychedelic religions, free exercise of religion, I'll just say, like I always have, and this is a big misnomer, there is no case, and under the First Amendment, it would be a prior restraint, okay, for the court or the government, Congress, to say you can't have a synthetic substance as a religious sacrament, okay? So I hope that puts any of that to rest. I know some people who get to this video surely have had these questions or heard these questions, maybe have debated those questions. So just want to save that little nugget for the end. And let me know in the comments if you want me to go even deeper, because that's just really a perfunctory purview of that question, that theological question, legal question. But yeah, just let me know. Would you let me go deeper into that or any other topics that were brushed today in presenting this paper? I hope y'all found this interesting, right? Again, there are people out there that on their own, and again, not suggesting or recommending this, but on their own accord are working spiritually, religiously with ketamine. And so obviously that's up to the individual. I hope y'all enjoyed this. If you made it this far in the video, man, thank y'all very much. Again, if you have the bandwidth, please like, comment, subscribe, would be very much appreciated. Otherwise, Buddy Bear says peace. I say peace and much love. We'll see you on the next video.